Hello guys, welcome back to another Big Al Devlin video, and what I am going to be doing now is I'm going to be giving you a quick video on contextual background and information behind some of the Eddas. The reason I am doing this is because a lot of the information we get in today's modern texts and sources, such as the internet, for example, that cover Nordic paganism or Britannic paganism, these are all just very highly descriptive and a bit dry and a bit boring. Even when they're trying to tell a story in a fun way, it's done in a modern form. Whereas you look at the ancient period where paganism was at its peak, we notice, of course, that the stories were told in poetic form. Now, having started to write my own Eddas called the Devlin Eddas, which I'll hit on here on YouTube, is that I've learned that the poetic form is such a powerful way of writing our learnings and our understandings of our belief system, because of course within a poem, unlike literary prose, we can put in so much symbolism, so much metaphors, that you can literally read between the lines. And what we can do is we can hide the knowledge between the lines in symbolic form. And by doing so, you will only learn the bits that are between the lines when your mind and awareness is ready. In essence, there is hidden knowledge within a poem, within an Edda. And only when your mind has ascended to a certain degree of consciousness are you able to read between the lines, quite literally, and see that hidden knowledge, much in the same way that runes are. Okay, they are just symbols, runes. They mean nothing on their own. But when you start to learn the meanings behind them, you can start seeing through them, and they can start to expand one's mind. And the particular Edda that we're going to be looking at today is actually going to be one of my own ones from the Devlin Edda, and that is the Coming of Lugh, which is what I'm putting in my Britannic Edda series, essentially. I'm going to have two, Norse and Britannic, but they're not separate. They do work together, and I'll do another video after this discussing how inferior the belief systems, you can see how they interlink with one another and how they obviously have a common root, even though they can at times be very different. So the Edda that we're going to look at today is the Coming of Lugh, and it's really just a story. That's all it is. It's just a telling of a story. Yeah, it's just there's not a lot of symbology behind it, is what I'm trying to say. So what I'd said in the introduction doesn't truly apply to this, but only in some degrees. Okay. Now, as I say, if we were talking about the runes, for example, there would be a lot of symbology behind there, and you could literally talk about the sort of the background sort of knowledge and information behind the runes for hours and hours on end, just from a sort of a little verse like that in poetic form. So there's a lot of inference when it comes to things like the runes, but when it comes to this, it's just a story. But I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the story so that you understand it. And what we'll do is we'll go through it. I write my Eddas in little books like this, just to keep track of it, and obviously I'll share it on here with you. So I think that's enough small talk. Let's go straight into business, shall we? So the Coming of Lugh. We'll start with the first verse, okay, and we'll start talking about what that's about. The Coming of Lugh. Ravaged in savage days the land of emerald green, upon every son in Hishnar, murdered and maimed they were found, those that lacked the ounce the reavers claimed. Ravaged in savage days the land of emerald green, upon every son in Hishnar, murdered and maimed they were found, those that lacked the ounce the reavers claimed. Now, what this particular passage is describing, it's giving a background to the state of Ireland at the time, when these sort of stories were first, well, not stories, but sort of historical stories were created and remembered amongst the locals. So at this point, you've got to remember that nothing was written down. There wasn't a written language amongst the Irish people and the Celtic people and all that, and the Norse people. It was all done through oration. So these stories would have been remembered in much the same way that I've done with the poems there. They would have been told as stories, but they were based, as I say, on historical individuals and people. So they were facts. Just because they weren't written down doesn't mean they're not facts. But obviously we've got to understand that they're, from generation to generation, the stories possibly got a little bit more grander and a little bit more distorted from individual to individual, just simply telling it in their own story form. Okay, much in the same way I've done here. I've taken a big block of text like that and I've shortened it down with symbolic language, shall we say. So what I'm doing, as I said within the first bit, is it's given a background to how Ireland was at the time. Ireland at this point had its original, was populated by its original Irish tribes. That is to say that the people who lived in Ireland at that time were literally the original peoples who had come there during the Ice Age and things like that and settled down. Okay, these were the very first Irish tribesmen to live in Ireland. As time goes on, obviously there are invasions, and there is mixing of genetics and peoples and culture to form the modern Irish people. The longer time goes on, the more mixing you get. But at this point, Ireland is, I don't like using the word pure as such, but it is as pure as you're going to get to the original Irish stock. And really, these people, they were called the Tuatha De Danann. There would have been multiple tribes, but this was the primary tribe that existed, if not the only real sort of grouping of people that existed at this point. And they were ravaged by pirates. Okay, so Ireland was not a peaceful land at this point in time. They were ravaged in savage days, that land of emerald green. Okay, they were ravaged by pirates called the Four Mauryans. Okay, who I described as the Reavers in my story, in my Edda. Okay, and the Four Mauryans were quite a brutal group of individuals. And they basically, didn't just go Viking on them and, attack and then leave and all the rest of it. They decided that they could cause so much fear that they wouldn't even have to attack. They could literally demand tribute, which is essentially what the Vikings did in the end also as well. And so every year, upon every sun in Hishna is just an area in Ireland, the hill in Hishna was where the tribute was paid. Upon every year, so once a year, the Four Mauryans pirates would come and they would demand a yearly taxation of an ounce of gold from everyone. Poor, rich, powerful, or, beggar, it doesn't matter. You owe an ounce of gold. Every single person in Ireland at the time. And if you didn't pay it, if you didn't have it, if you were short by it, even just a small amount, they would either kill you or maim you. Okay? And they would burn down your property. Okay? So this is what the Four Mauryans did. This is the state of Ireland at this time. And that's how I've, described it here. Upon every son in Hishna, murdered and maimed, they were found. The people who couldn't pay, essentially. Those that lacked the ounce, the Reavers claimed. Okay, so those that couldn't pay were treated very poorly. Okay, now Baelor was the invader. Spear nor blade could slay. No other, the ravaged king, ruled the Tuatha De Danann. Though of him of little faith his people had. Yearned they did for courage and strength, found in a hero named Lugh. So, in this part, we start to see how basically, if you oppress a land enough, okay, if you are a militaristic group of people and you just keep attacking, a bit like the Huns did and all those kind of things, but without settling. Okay, so the Vikings attacked, but then they settled in the lands and adopted the culture of those they conquered and married into the nobility of the countries where they ended up. Normandy, perfect example, for example, in France, and parts of Scotland, Ireland, that they were, became Viking in essence, but Viking and native mixed together. Okay, but if you don't do this, if you don't conquer the lands, you ravage them. Literally, you just keep, like a locust, keep eating away at the land and at the people. Eventually, you can bet your bottom dollar, sooner or later, doesn't matter, at some point, there will be a revolt, a rebellion, if you wish. Can't be a rebellion because in theory you're not in control of those people, but you know what I'm trying to say. It's a revolt against the oppression that these pirates were essentially putting upon the people of Ireland. And it's exactly what happened. Ireland went into complete war with the Four Mauryans. Baelor, he was the leader of the Four Mauryans pirates, very powerful man, who was very successful in combat. As you can imagine, he, to demand this tribute for however long it'd been there, possibly centuries, this tribute. Obviously, Baelor wouldn't have been around all that time, but to continue this tribute that these Four Mauryans exacted from Ireland, they had to be pretty damn scary people, because Ireland has never been a pushover country. The Irish people are a warrior culture, a warrior grouping, essentially. They come from Celtic stock, so they're going to be big, they're going to be strong, and they're going to, enjoy a good fight, as they still do in Ireland, right? And so for them to be oppressed, Baelor and his Four Mauryans must have been pretty damn fierce. Okay, and Baelor, as I say, he was the invader that spear nor blade could slay. He fought many times against the Irish. There would have been resistance, obviously, from time to time, and he was never defeated. Okay, not until this point, at least, anyway. Now, Nuada, spelt Nuada, is the king of Ireland at this time, the High King of Ireland at this time. And so he ruled over, as I say, the people called the Tuatha De Danann, which was the original tribes people of Ireland. And he was the king of all Ireland at this point. But as I say, the people of Ireland at this point had little faith within this king. Not because he was a bad ruler. He was beneficent. He was benevolent. Even he was a nice guy, right? But he wasn't strong enough, not by himself, at least anyway. He was not strong enough to oppose the will of Baelor. He didn't want to oppose. He didn't want to rock the boat. At the end of the day, he's king, so he can afford that ounce of gold like no one's problem. It doesn't matter to him. It's not a problem. He can always afford that ounce of gold. But it's the poor, obviously, who would have been suffered the most, because if none of them could really afford that, it was very, very difficult. It really put them in poverty. Not only the country as a whole, but obviously the poor really suffered that extra amount. And so, the people yearned, they did, for courage and strength found in a hero named Lugh. And Lugh was as I say, is an ancient hero of Ireland. If you meet any Irishman, they will probably most likely know of Lugh to some description, or whether they've studied history or not, he will be known. He's a sort of figurehead within Ireland, okay, still to this day. And Lugh was of the fairy mounds. He was a fairy, okay? So as you see, what I describe here, of the fairy mounds he was, the son of Cain. The long arm was revered even from the elders of fairyland. That's my way of saying that Lugh was quite clearly, to the people of Ireland, one of the fairies that existed within Irish land. Now, I will be doing a video describing and discussing the existence of fairies and exactly what they are. I've got a mini-series going on already, but a specific discussion relating to this exactly. But Lugh was essentially a fairy of the Subscibe, okay? Now, these were fairies that were more commonly like the elves in Lord of the Rings. They were humans plus one. They were godlike beings, okay? Now, they weren't immortal. They did die of old age. That's what godlike being means. If you're God, you live forever. You don't die, okay? You can be killed, but you don't die of old age or illness or things like this. If you're a godlike being, you're not far off that, but you can eventually die of old age and things like this. But you tend to have magical powers, and you tend to be beyond what humans can obtain, essentially. Even at their maximum potential, you are something different, something better. Okay, and so the Subscibe, which Lugh was a member of, or born of, were the fairies of Ireland in essence, or a group of the higher echelon of fairies in Ireland, and so he did and came from the fairy mounds within legend. That's where he came from. He came from the mounds where the fairies lived. Now, at this point, with the Tuatha De Danann, this is the name of the people that the fairies coexisted with. There was no conflict between the original Irish tribesmen and the fairies. And it is believed, as I say, that when the Tuatha De Danann were eventually defeated by the Milesians, which is a group of Celts essentially from Spain, that the Tuatha De Danann, the people, retreated with their gods, or the fairies essentially, the godlike beings, into the mounds. And so the people either mixed obviously with the Milesians, or they retreated alongside their gods into the mounds and essentially disappeared for all intents and purposes. Although, of course, those who believe know that the fairies are still there in Ireland. Okay, now this is the background, as I say, of Lugh. He was fairy. He was known to be a fairy to his own people, and this was something excuse me, this was something special. This was something greater than what man is, and so he was not only a hero amongst the Irish people, but a hero amongst his own people, okay, the fairies themselves, and was revered even amongst the elders of his people. So the elder fairies, the literal, the sort of the top part of the aristocracy of fairyland, because fairies actually had an aristocracy very similar to how humans had aristocracy at the time. And they bestowed upon him several gifts. They bestowed upon him, the elders did, their greatest gifts, wonders, all of them. The magic of Monaghan. Okay, so Monaghan was the sea god. Okay, this was a full-blown god. This was not a godlike being. Monaghan was a god. Okay, and he was a sea god, and he was the god of the fairies. Okay, so it's the god that the fairies themselves revered and respected and gave praise to. Okay, and he was a sea god. He was the god of the sea, very similar to Neptune, essentially, or Poseidon, in essence, in Greco-Roman belief systems. And the sea god giveth a mighty sword, the retaliator, through which every and any shield with each swing it would cleave. A breastplate worn, never be pierced by spear nor blade, ever wielded by a man. Kind of screwed the reading up there, but anyway, what I'm trying to say here is that the god, that the elders who were obviously in commune with the god Manan or Mananan, okay, gave to Lugh some of the wondrous magical items that they had that were directly related to their god. The mighty sword itself, the Retaliator, that was the name of the sword, okay, was the sword of Manan himself, his own sword that he would use. And this sword had the ability, the magical ability, if you wish, through which every and any shield with each swing it would cleave. Basically, no shield could provide any protection against this sword. That's quite dangerous, especially when you're good with wielding the sword. The only way to defend yourself, to put a shield up, it would go straight through it like it was not even there. Okay? A breastplate worn, never be pierced by spear nor blade, ever wielded by man. And so the next gift that was given was this breastplate, okay, armor in essence, curious, and it had the ability that it could not be pierced by any weapon wielded by a man, in essence, which at that point would be either a spear, or if you were very rich, a sword. And it doesn't matter how well forged your steel was, if you were a man. If you were not a godlike being, or god yourself, you could not pierce this breastplate. So, in essence, he was very well protected. To ride upon the emerald land, a horse of fleet foot gifted. Ainvar was its name, as swift as winter's wailing gusts. No man could strike so fast to even harm its rider, never to be wounded. This, in my opinion, is the most glorious gifts that was given to Lugh. It was a horse, okay, the fastest horse in Ireland, ultimately, called Ainvar. And as I say, it was literally described in old ways as being as fast as the winds of winter. He was so fast, in fact, that as long as you were on his back and you were charging at your enemy, no man could ever hope to strike you, to land a good blow against you, because he was so fast. No man's reflexes were basically good enough to strike at you or the horse itself, and so it was very, very hard to harm a rider of Ainvar. Now, the last and final gift, and the end of this discussion that we're going to be talking about today, okay, was a gift. Perhaps this is actually the most magnificent of gifts. The horse, I love. I love the idea of the horse, this beautiful white horse. But the most, I suppose, amazing gift that was given was the boat of the sea god himself. Now, the sea god is going to be pretty much very powerful when in the sea. Yes, that's his domain, okay? And so when he gives you his boat, you're going to imagine that boat is going to be probably one of the best boats that you'll ever come across. Even if another god was to give you their boat, it's probably not going to be as good as his, okay? And this boat was particularly magnificent. It's called the Boat of Monaghan, after the god that gave it and bestowed it. And it had the capacity to read the mind of the captain, essentially, that was in the boat. It could read the mind of anyone inside of it, and their thoughts, whatever they were thinking of regard to their destination, that boat would just take you there. It would navigate perfectly to wherever you were trying to go, and that's why I wrote here: for upon that sea god gave the god's own boat. That boat of Monaghan could read any mind, their thoughts of travel giveth direction demanded. And so that's why I wrote that basically this boat would travel anywhere that you wanted, safely and securely and swiftly, just by you thinking, I want to go there, I want to go visit this place. As long as you knew of the existence of this place, this boat would take you there in the most secure and swiftest fashion possible. That's truly a magnificent gift. Now, these gifts all have a role to play later on in the story of Lugh. Lugh's quite an expansive story, and writing these poems is not quick. Okay, I've got to read. Well, first of all, this is just one of my texts. There we go. That's one of the texts that I'm going through. Okay, and I essentially turning into poetic form. So bear with me, guys. I will write these up as quickly as possible, but I feel that by compacting it into poems, not only will you be able to get through it quicker, but you can hear how a pagan would tell these stories. I'm a pagan, and I'm telling the stories in the way that, I feel a pagan should tell the story. So you're getting a pagan's perspective on literacy sources that of course I'm using as reference points. Okay, and as I say, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I don't think there's anything really more that I can tell you about in that. There's a little bit more I can tell you in the next section of War Begins, to help expand the sort of details that I kind of miss out or make metaphorical or symbolic in different ways. But for today, guys, I hope that's cleared up what that poem is about. And I hope you're enjoying the Eddas that I'm writing, and also the Eddas, the traditional Norse Eddas. Wait. The poetic Edda. Here we go. I've got the poetic Edda here, which again I'm getting through. I'm about halfway through it now for you guys. I will be narrating that, and I'll try and narrate one of them later. Okay. So bear with me, guys. I will be putting up as many videos as possible for your pleasure and benefit, as well as my own, of course. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.